Okay then folks, a few people seem to really enjoy the last little 101 video, so I thought I'd give another one a try. Glue sniffing. No, not glue sniffing. Using glue for your scale models. So, generally speaking, most modelers will have all sorts of different glues at their disposal. Some won't know and won't know where to start. So, very quickly, most scale modelling will basically narrow down to about 4 different types of glue. You'll have your poly cements, of which there are 2 different types. We'll go into them in a minute. Super glue, 2-part epoxy, and basically PVA. So, what's the difference? Well, I suppose we should all really start at the very beginning, which is how most people start. They get themselves a little Airfix starter set, and they'll have something like this. It's a little tube of thick glue. It'll go everywhere, it will smell, and it's how most people start the hobby. How this stuff works is it's a contact glue. So by abusing the use of this rocket body and trying not to get it all over my fingers, well, actually no. You know what, I'm going to make it slightly simpler on myself. Because the next up is something like this. Now this is basically the same stuff, but thinned ever so slightly for ease of application. Now if you want to be using this stuff, I do recommend getting something like this. Because what it's got, if it still works, no it doesn't, is in there's a needle applicator, which has since dried and gone horrible. So much for that idea. And the way that works basically is it should make it a little bit easier to do what I'm about to do. So what I'm going to do is I'll make it a little bit easier by just putting a little bit on the paper. Should have done this from the beginning, obviously. Ooh, I remember that smell. Okay, and basically the mating surfaces, if I can get this to focus, just here, where you're going to put this stuff. So wherever you put this stuff, it will glue. You know, something like that. Okay. Then when you put your part on, I know I've not glued it all because I want a little bit to hold. You'll hold it together and you squeeze it and you'll get a little bit of excess squeeze out. Okay. And you hold that there. Preferably in like a peg or something like this. Done. And that'll glue over time. After about 20 minutes or so, we'll come back to that and we'll see how it's done. Now, most people, however, after a little while, will move up to something like this. So these are the 2 biggest names in what they call hot glues. Okay? They're called a hot glue because they don't glue the same way. They glue via a chemical reaction. It's not a contact adhesive, the same as normal poly cement. Tamiya Extra Thin, otherwise known as TET, is probably the best known, but some areas might be able to find this stuff instead a little bit easier. Certainly in the case of Great Britain, a few years ago there was a bit of a shortage on Tamiya Extra Thin, and that's how I ended up with this stuff. Personally, I can't tell any difference, so I just go with whichever one I can get my hands on, which lately has normally been Tamiya Extra Thin. Both of them little glass bottles. They've both got a brush applicator inside. See that on any of those? You'll see in a minute. And the way they work is slightly different. I'm just going to put that in my little stand here, because the other thing with Tamiya Extra Thin is it does have a tendency to melt things you don't want it to if it spills. So what you do instead is, instead of putting it on these mating surfaces, you put the part together first. Now this is particularly good for checking whether or not something's even fit or not. So you can check your fit, make sure you've got that right, and then when you're happy, you take the little brush, okay, and you just brush it onto the area you want glued. Being careful of fingerprints. Spin it around so I can get hold of the other side. Using such little parts I thought would be a good idea for this video. Wrong again. Okay, just like that. And this will melt very imperceptibly. What happens is that is dry. Near enough. I probably wouldn't touch it with a warm hand, but that is glued. Unlike this one, which is still drying. And still thinking about it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, in that case then, why do I still own these? Well, even though they're slower, they do dry a lot stronger. So for large parts, wing pieces, etc., you want a really, really strong glue. Sometimes this is a good idea. A wing part, you could glue a big section in the center with this stuff, put it together, let that mate, line it up, and then run some extra thin across the edge just to make it all neat and tidy. This will make sure that it stays glued. Yeah, as you can see there. Now, as I say, this, whilst it is dry to the touch, you can see there, it is imperceptible there's been any glue there, which makes it a lot cleaner and tidier. Now, of course, at this moment, you could still wrench it apart, but see how it's sort of coming apart like it's squidgy. You could literally push that back together now. Now, the other benefit of these hot glues is if you don't quite get something right, you can very quickly run some more over, and hopefully without touching it, pull the item apart. Because right now, that's still activating. Now you could clean these two parts up now and reposition them. Handy tip. Now, as you get further into the hobby, you'll find there are certain other things handy. Now, none of these things, not this stuff, and certainly not this stuff, are any good on clear parts. They will fog them, they'll make them nasty, and, well, you can't fix it, to be honest. Once they're wrecked, they're wrecked. And this is where PVA comes in. Now, this is relatively normal PVA glue. You used it at school, you know, peeling off your fingers and stuff. This particular stuff, Microsoft Crystal Clear, is the biggest company in the business for making PVA, especially for the scale model industry. Technically, any of it will work. I do like this stuff. It's been formulated especially for the job. You can use it for other little tricks as well. You can use it for not just for gluing clear parts, making clear parts if they're small enough. You can drag the glue across. You can fix a maybe a missing tiny little window or something like this. Brilliant stuff. Highly recommend it. Then, as you work your way through the hobby, you will start finding that certain plastics aren't the same. You will find that you start using things like resin aftermarket or other obscure plastic types that aren't your normal normal kit plastic. This is where superglue comes in. Now again, there are specialist companies such as Rocket. I do actually quite like this one. This is superglue, but it's specially formulated so it dries clear. Quite handy. I don't know about odorless. It still smells of something, I know that. Just the job for obviously things if you're unsure, if you're adding etched brass, resin, or if you're just not sure what plastic it is. As always, test on a small part of the sprue or algate just in case. There has been reports of people using the hot glues like TET on Bandai plastic and it melting. So always, and I mean melting, like gone, melting. So again, always test on a spare part. Now, generally speaking though, superglue for the scale model industry is really quite expensive. which is why I don't bother. So what I do is I get some cheapo stuff from the supermarket, which will perfectly do the job, and I bought some of these. And these are small dropper bottles from Wish. And basically, once it's sealed, it will stay liquid. So you only have to use the little bit that you want. This needle applicator will seal itself pretty much straight away. A quick lighter flame to the nozzle clears it. And again, I'll reseal it again once I'm done, and it stays liquid, and I don't have to go through it. Otherwise, these things are actually a bit of a false economy, because what will end up happening is you'll use it once, it'll seal and go solid, and you won't use it again. So much for doing it on the cheap. There are also, however, times where you might be doing something along the lines of resin, etc., and it's a big item and it's really strong. This is where super glue isn't going to cut it. And this is where your sort of two-part epoxy comes in. Now again, this is now entering the sort of realms of you already kind of know what you're doing. But this stuff is quite simple. Basically, there's a glue and an activator. Might have that the wrong way around, but still. They come out of the two tubes at the end. You mix them. You're on your little pallet. Then they go on the item. And you've probably got a couple of minutes until it's solid. And then it will be solid. Now this stuff again does suffer from the same problems that super glue does, that you have to be really, really careful how you keep your nozzles and keep your actual glue, because otherwise it can seize up and that's it then. You're never getting any of it off at all. It'll be completely solid. And the stuff can get quite expensive. So again, you don't want to be playing tricks. Back to the old poly cement. So this is back to the old school stuff that you started with. You'll see that there is a bit of an edge there where it's bloomed up. Now that can be quite handy sometimes if you want to make sure that it's a really, really solid gap filling problem. Try and get it in the center. There we go. Because of course you can then sand this down, okay, until it's perfectly smooth. But that will now be pretty darn solid. Now of course what I would then do is now I know that part, if the part was bigger, is solid, is then just run a little bit of tape across it. And just let that glue. Because now you have the best of both worlds. You have a very, very strong join with the original style polystyrene cement and stuff. And then quick glued around the edges for strength with the tape. Now that is ready to go, ready to be cleaned up. Glues. Any questions? Just ask. As always, please comment, please hit like. Apparently it makes a big difference to YouTube. And yeah, feel free to share. Take care, folks.